let's talk about the shoe characteristics again. Today I want to explain a few very interesting things about the heel to toe drop, commonly known as the heel drop or just the drop. I'm not going to tell you that you should choose a high drop if you have Achilles tendon issues, and you should choose a low drop if you have knee issues. Well, actually I just did in fact. But there are many videos on YouTube repeating the same, so I want to bring some extra value. So what is the effect of the drop on your running stride from a biomechanics point of view? And what would be the optimal height? What are the benefits and what are the risks? Is there a perfect drop height that yields the most speed for, let's say, a hypothetical perfect athletes? And why the shoe manufacturers do not make shoes with more than 10 millimeter drop, perhaps 12. And a question that will surprise you at the end of the video: does the drop depend on the shoe size? Yeah, that sounds silly, but it's a very important point that almost everybody ignores. So first, let's talk about the push-off phase. Okay, so to understand how the drop works, let's first discuss how the stride looks like with no heel-to-toe drop, so with a flat shoe. Now with no drop, so let's say barefoot, we need to consider the point in the gait cycle when the heel lifts off the ground when moving forward. This is more or less the point when the calves and the soleus and Achilles tendon are under maximal tension and suffer most strain. Of course, depending on whether you're walking or running and depending on your speed and ankle mobility, this point may be at a different place. It may be further behind or further in front, and the tension may be more or less. Also, it depends on your running style. For instance, you can run with rather flat cycle, like a low to the ground, in which case the point of maximal tension may be here, or you can run with a more vertical leg movement where your foot travels higher in the end, and then the point of maximal tension may be somewhere here. Also, depending on the angle of your leg with the thigh, the knee flexion at the point where the heel lifts off the ground. Now, if we introduce a drop, this point can be moved further back because there is an inclination behind your body, so allegedly allowing for extending the leg further behind and pushing more with the same strain on your tissues, on your Achilles tendons and muscles. Now, notice that the drop is not the only thing to consider if we are to analyze the push-off phase. Of course, the rocker. The rocker also plays an important role because it allows to bring the leg even further back and push for longer after the heel takes off and the foot acquires inclination. But there is much more than that to the rocker, and so I recommend you check this video to learn more about it. And then obviously there is the carbon plate. If you use an S-shaped carbon plate like this one, then this point is where the plate is going to act as a springboard and help propel the leg up. If you want to know more about that, again, I have a dedicated video explaining how the plate works. So coming back to the drop, this heel takeoff point occurs earlier with a flat shoe than with a high drop shoe. But this point is then also the point where you transfer your body weight onto the ball of your foot. That is the metatarsal heads, like this. Now, putting the weight on the ball of your foot is basically how you compress the foam in the forefoot and then get a bounce back from the foam. So it means the pressure on the metatarsal heads occurs earlier with low drop shoe, and hence the compression of the forefoot foam and therefore the bounce. So what it means is that if you bounce earlier and your heel takes off earlier, you will have a shorter stride with a more vertical component, so more like that. That is typically what you'll naturally feel if you try to run in a low drop or a zero drop shoe, like this one. Your stride will be much more circular with a higher vertical component. But this effect is not just about using a drop or not. It's also applicable in terms of how much drop you use, because there is indeed a huge difference between, for instance, a 4mm drop and an 8mm drop. Yeah, I know this is just 4mm difference, but it means you can bring the foot approximately 4 centimeters further back. So only 4mm drop means you can bring the foot 4 centimeters back. Now let's talk about the Achilles tendon. The Achilles is somewhat elastic because it's a tendon, but it stretches only a few millimeters, really not much. The muscles, like the calves and the soleus, can stretch too, arguably a bit more than the tendon even. But the recall effect does not come from the muscle fibers. It means the muscle fibers, they do contract in response to being elongated. In fact, this is a neuromuscular response, not a direct reaction of the muscle tissues. But they are not made to store and deliver back the elastic energy like an elastic band, but the tendon is designed for that. However, the Achilles tendon does not elongate a lot, and even more so, the more rigid your tendon is, the more energy it can return. So that means the difference between a drop of 8mm and, for instance, a drop of 5mm, which is just 3 mils, but it is quite a lot if you consider the Achilles had to compensate for that by stretching. Elongating or stretching the Achilles by 3mm is a lot. So really a higher drop allows for the Achilles to do its job at a position that is further back behind your body. But before we go any further, let's clarify what we are talking about. How do we define the drop? When a manufacturer claims they release a shoe with an 8mm drop, what does it really mean? Well, simply put, the drop is the difference between the height of the heel and of the forefoot. So you can imagine it's basically like having a wedge like that under your foot, like that, and it's basically the height of this wedge. Now, where and how is that measured exactly? Well, by the regulation of World Athletics, the former IAAF, the heel height is measured at 12% of the shoe's internal length. So that means around here. Notice that it is not at the very back of the shoe, and it excludes any protuberance like this, like the tail that you might have at the rear of the shoe, and also ignores the effect of the rocker, the heel rocker, unless it's a very big rocker, like here, for instance, in the Wave Rebellion Pro, that reaches very far. And similarly, the measurement of the forefoot is to be taken at 75% of the internal shoe length from the heel, so that means around here. And this is also by the World Athletics regulations. What they say is that none of these two measures can exceed 40mm for road running shoes. It's different for track shoes and so on. However, there's no limitation on the drop, so on the inclination of the shoe, and there's also no limitation on what happens in between, like here. That's why basically the Wave Rebellion Pro is a legal shoe. Also, they say that these measures include the insole that is provided with the shoe, but they do recognize that you may add additional insole. So that means you can potentially go a little bit higher than 40 mils while still being legal. Now, so obviously this is to be measured at the center of the shoe, like the center here, the center line. But you must measure it down to the outsole to where it touches the ground, regardless of whether there is a groove like that or not. And of course, the upper part of the measurement is to be measured at the insole inside the shoe, which means you cannot easily measure it if you don't have appropriate tools, because you need to have a tool like that reaches the inside. So don't be fooled by how the shoe looks from the outside. It needs to be measured from the inside. Now notice that by these regulations, the Wave Rebellion Pro is pretty much a zero drop shoe, because the height around here is pretty much the same as the height here. but it really doesn't feel like so because of the very aggressive heel rocker and the amount of foam that you have here in the middle part of the shoe. Right, so it may seem irrelevant, but notice that the effect of the insole. Firstly, it is allowed to insert additional insole that doesn't count toward the limit of 40 mil. So that means you can increase the drop of your shoe by adding insole or replacing the existing one a little bit because the insole as such also has a drop. And secondly, it also means that the drop tends to reduce with time, especially because the insole tends to lose its cushioning, more so in the heel area than in the forefoot. I'm sure if you've ever seen old insoles, you know that they may be quite worn down and flat. So reducing the overall drop by maybe 2 to 3 millimeters. Also, do not confine the heel drop with the stack height, especially the stack height in the heel. That's important because you often hear that a low drop shoe is hard on your heel in the landing phase, like it hurts your heel, and for that reason it forces you to land on the forefoot. Well, I guess that idea comes from the perception that a low drop shoe is like these barefoot shoes that have a very thin sole, but this is not true. Low drop doesn't mean low stack. In fact, it might even be the contrary, but I'll talk about that in a moment. So low drop means the shoe is flat. That's what it means, but it can be thick, and a thick shoe should not hurt your heels when landing. So let's talk now about the landing phase. Now, since indeed most low drop shoes also have a rather low stack, or lower stack than the higher drop shoes, the lower stack in the heel also means you have to shorten your stride in the landing phase, and that in turn will reduce the ground contact time, but it does not imply running faster. It's just a shorter gait cycle. Perhaps it fosters a higher cadence, but that's it. So a zero drop kind of asks for landing right under your body. That's what you want, especially for sprinting. In this case, sprinters typically have very powerful legs and use this enormous power to pull the leg backwards from the front of their body, much more so than in distance running, where you rather push behind your body. So for sprinters, sprinters want to hit the ground just under their body with their leg moving backwards at the same time, even before making contact with the ground, so moving backwards before making contact. And they want to minimize the ground contact time, so they focus on a high cadence and not bringing the leg too far behind with the foot on the ground. That's why sprinters do a lot of A skips and B skips and extended leg drills and that kind of things to practice this action of scratching the ground from the front of the body. So indeed, sprinting shoes typically have no drop and a very thin sole, prioritizing lightness and the grip also, thanks to the spikes and the tartan surface on the tracks. For middle distance races on a track up to 10,000 meters, athletes also use similar shoes with the spikes and a low stack and low drop, partly thanks to the bounciness and the cushioning provided by the tartan. But yet it is very demanding on your muscles and tissues, because in distance running the power is exerted more from behind the body, and the ground contact starts typically slightly ahead of the body, hence a longer ground contact time and a lower cadence. So for us distance runners on the road or even on the trails, the ground contact is likely to happen a little bit ahead of the body, and so likely to happen at the heel like that, which is not bad because at this point you haven't loaded all your body weight yet, and because your knee I cannot show the knee here, should be flexed, and so it doesn't transmit a braking force, but rather serves to absorb the pounding. So that's why A skips and B skips and extended leg drills are not so great for us. which I already discussed in the video about running, which I'll put a link there. Now you have to consider that one of the elements that make up an efficient running stride is the ankle that goes from dorsiflexion to anteflexion. Dorsiflexion, anteflexion at push-off, right? That means the ankle must be in a dorsiflex position at some point before it toggles to anteflexion. And it is much better if the ankle is already dorsiflexed when it touches the ground and keeps this position in a stance phase and then goes to anteflexion at push-off. This is much better than touching the ground with an anteflexed ankle and then dorsiflexed very briefly during the stance phase, like that. Anyway, that's to say that trying to hit the ground ahead of you with your forefoot or even midfoot, which most people try to achieve because they've heard forefoot striking is much better. Well, actually, trying to achieve that is a very bad idea and even inefficient way to use your ankle. So in this sense, a high drop will make you touch the ground with a higher distance between the ground and your forefoot. So it discourages trying to achieve this inefficient forefoot landing ahead of the body. But again, this is what sprinters do with zero drop shoes, which facilitate it, because sprinters run very differently, but this is not what we should try to achieve as distance runners. So yes, mid to high drop helps preventing this. Now, what happens immediately after that? So in the stance phase, well, as your body moves forward, after hitting the ground, your body moves forward with your foot on the ground. The forefoot comes to touch the ground and your full body weight is now on your fully flat foot. As you might expect, and as you've probably heard many times, this is when you want to have your foot right under your body's center of mass. Well, in fact, it's not so easy because everything is like continuously moving. So let's say during the ground contact phase, you progressively load and unload, right? Then what you want is to have your the foot at the vertical of the center of mass when the load is at its highest, or perhaps just very, very slightly behind your center of mass, in fact, because that will help pushing forward and not just upward. In reality, this is what people mean when they say you should lean forward, or better that you should lean from the ankle, but nobody explains it properly. So it's not about leaning, it's about having the maximum load just very slightly behind the vertical of your center of mass. Anyway, coming back to the drop. Consider the center stance position with the maximum load. Now, watch out. So to simplify, let's pretend the ankle is at 90 degrees, so that would be my leg, and the ankle is at 90 degrees. Now, a high shoe drop in this position means that the foot here will be at a few degrees angle from the ground, right? And so the leg naturally will also be at the same angle relative to the vertical, leading to a flexion of the knee here. Now, conversely, with no drop, the foot would be totally flat and therefore the leg would be totally vertical, meaning no knee flexion. So in this case, you'd either get a lot of braking forces because your center of mass would be behind the foot, like here, or you'd have to flex the knee and so let's say here this is the knee, flex the knee and bring the center of mass forward to the vertical of the foot by forcing an angle smaller than 90 degrees in the ankle. So more dorsiflexion, which puts more strain on your Achilles and also limits how much you can push during the push-off phase. And there's even a second very important effect of a high drop, as it facilitates the flexion of the knee during the stance phase, because of course you do want to flex your knee, so you want to touch the ground with your knee already flexed and then flex it even more up to this maximum load point, and then sort of bounce back as you push behind. So a certain amount of knee flexion is necessary to an efficient stride, at least in distance running, not only to absorb the pounding, but also to bounce back. Now again, this is all in the nuances. You don't want to flex your knee too much either and sort of sink into the ground, because then you will lose all the elastic effect and you will not be able to maintain a high cadence. So yes, there are two clear benefits of a high drop during the stance phase. So overall, it seems that drop is a good thing for distance running, but how much? Why is it that we cannot find shoes with more than a 10 to 12 millimeter drop? A few years ago, I think some brands released shoes with even higher drop, like 16 millimeter if I remember well, but they seem to have abandoned the idea, and nowadays like 8 millimeter seems to be the sweet point where most shoes gravitate around. This seems to be what sells best and what people like the most. So what's the issue with the huge drop? Well, first of all, in legal racing shoes, there is a limitation of 40 millimeters here maximum in the heel. So it means in order to manufacture a higher drop, you effectively have to shave off height from the forefoot. For instance, I don't know, let's say an 18 millimeter drop would require having like 40 here in the heel and only 22 in the forefoot, which is not a lot. Now this is a problem because first of all, the foam in the forefoot is what provides most of the bounciness of the shoe. So you want to have enough foam here, you cannot remove too much. And second of all, the ball of your foot endures a lot of pressure at every step during running. And so it requires sufficient cushioning in the forefoot. So you cannot remove too much foam in the forefoot for that reason too. Now you may say, okay, but what about non-legal shoes, like training shoes? Indeed, nowadays we can find shoes with more than 40 millimeters of foam here in the heel, up to 50 or perhaps even more. Well, okay, the higher the stack, the more unstable the shoe becomes, but okay. So yes, you could imagine a shoe with 50 millimeters here in the heel and like 30 for instance here at the front, making it a 20 millimeter drop. Well, the issue with that are basically the same as walking on high heels if you've ever tried doing so. Number one, the ground contact will clearly be on the heel and it will take more time to get your forefoot to touch the ground, making it like slam the ground, which is not great. Number two, the mid stance will naturally imply more flexion of the knee, putting more, because your foot is there, so the knee will flex more, so putting more strain on the patella tendon, which is the tendon that covers the patella. Or otherwise you will try to compensate for the knee flexion by moving your ankle to anti-flexion like this. But then you cannot use your ankle to push off behind you because it's already anti-flexed. Or you will reach the point of maximum load with your foot already behind the vertical of your center of mass, like that. So you'll kind of lean forward too much and either fall on your face or run with anteversion of your hips to sort of curve your spine back, which is obviously not great either. And then also, like I said, during the push-off phase, a very high drop would lead to basically disabling the push from the ankle movement because it's already anti-flex. So not a fully efficient stride. Also, just as if you were wearing high heels all the time, you will end up putting too much strain on your metatarsal heads. That's the ball of your foot. And you'll spend the rest of your life going to the chiropodist, that is the foot doctor, to heal your metatarsal head. And finally, similarly, there is a high risk that your Achilles tendon, let's say the tendon here, and the calf muscles will end up shortening because they are always in this sort of short position. On the other hand, most endurance racing shoes, or let's say super shoes, do incorporate a carbon plate these days. Now, in respect to that, obviously needs to be enough space in the heel for the plate to do his job, like the springboard effect, especially for S-shaped plates, like I explained in the video about the plate. So there needs to be space for it to bend down, and this space is usually filled by softer foam under the heel, so it can easily compress. Now, arguably, the plate would work just as well, or even better, in fact, with no foam at all here under the heel, so no drop. But then we come back to the issues we've already discussed. However, again, this is exactly what sprinting shoes are. It's basically a plate with practically no foam under the heel. So yeah, with all this considered, the optimal heel drop seems to be in and around 7 to 9 millimeters. Now, some other important considerations. In terms of possible injuries, a high drop reduces the strain on your Achilles tendon and calf muscles because it's less tense, and also the plantar fascia, which is the fascia under your foot, for the reasons I've already explained. Now, conversely, a low or zero drop will put a lot of strain on these tissues. So be careful if you want to go zero drop. Introduce that very gradually and make sure you have made enough conditioning in the gym before. On the other hand, a high drop also implies more knee flexion, which in principle is good for your stride, but might be an issue if you already suffer from knee pain. You're more likely to get injuries like patella tendonitis, which happened to me a couple of years ago. Conversely, zero drop shoe generally leads to a stride with less knee flexion, but consequently more load transferred to your hips and to the trochanter area here, which is where the femur inserts into the hip. So this might become your weak point then. Now, considering this, it is no wonder that most running shoes you'll find in the shops have mid to high drops, because they are not only more efficient but also suit better beginner runners who don't have enough strength and resistance in their Achilles, the calf muscle, the soleus muscle, and the plantar fascia. But that being said, it is not a bad idea to train with low drop shoes from time to time. I typically use these ones with 4 millimeter or 5 drop to gain strength in the muscles, stiffen your Achilles tendon, and also experience a different running stride with a different usage of the same muscles. Okay, now something that nobody talks about. I've been doing quite a bit of research on this, but I couldn't really find reliable information. So I'm just going to make no assumptions and tell you my logical deductions. Rather than the drop, the important measure is the inclination, the angle. In this respect, the same drop in bigger shoe sizes means a lower angle. So an 8 millimeter drop in size, let's say 36, is equivalent to perhaps 12 millimeter drop in size 47. So typically women with smaller feet in general should be aware of this. And an 8 millimeter for them is quite a lot. Although on the other hand, women are generally more used to wearing high heels and often have shortened calves and Achilles as a consequence of this. And conversely, big guys with big feet can probably go to a higher drop, like 10 or perhaps even 12 millimeters, if you can find that. But be careful anyway, because it requires a bit of an adaptation period. All right, that's it for today. I hope you've learned something beyond what every other YouTuber says. If you have, then please subscribe to the channel. I'm preparing a comprehensive video in the coming weeks about how to generate speed in the first place for endurance athletes. So again, with explanations that nobody else will give on YouTube, or at least I haven't been able to find a good explanation. So yes, don't forget to subscribe to not miss that one. And in the meantime, well, if you run around, as always, remember to look around. See you next time.